Welcome back to Forgotten Hollywood. Due to the mostly disappointing summer movie selection, I've decided to see what past movie seasons had to offer, and since 1975's Jaws, there have been several classics released during this season. Most of the big ones I've already seen: Star Wars, Rocky II, Annie, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, and The Last Crusade. So many of my favorite films came out in the summer. But I also found several classics that I had never gotten around to watching. I decided to fix this and sat down to watch one such classic, then another, and another, and then I gave up on a movie and just watched Perry Mason. When I have a limited window to watch things, I tend to be very selective. It's only when I'm watching a movie for a video like this that I make myself watch to the end, no matter how I feel. In this case, I was just looking for something enjoyable. Imagine my surprise when three classics in a row had me grabbing the remote so quickly after starting. I began with Twister from 1996, starring Helen Hunt, Bill Paxton, and Cary Elwes. Now, I knew going in that I might have a problem with this because just 4 months ago a tornado hit my town, damaged my house, but I thought that I would have to watch it sooner or later with the sequel coming out next year, and I thought I'd give it a try. The opening scene killed it for me. It's 1969, somewhere in Oklahoma, where a family is taking shelter from an EF5 tornado. This is an interesting choice as they specifically chose a state that didn't see anything higher than an EF2 in 1969. If you were going to be that specific, just choose a real event to base your character's life story on. The next idiotic thing was that the door to the family shelter had windows. Yeah, windows. I would hope that even people who don't live in Tornado Alley, as I do, know that no one in their right mind would put the window on the door to a storm shelter. For those of you who don't live in an area with tornadoes, a storm shelter is like 98% underground. The only part that's above ground is the door. So, guess what part gets hit by the debris? For the record, there are still windows in town that are boarded up from the storms we had in the spring. So the only reason to put a window in the door of this particular shelter was so that the camera inside the shelter could see the debris flying by, which turned out to be unnecessary because shortly after they entered the shelter, the door got ripped off with her dad holding on to it because he thought that he could hold the door against the EF5 tornado. It was just about the stupidest decision I've ever seen in a movie about any form of storm. I've seen made for TV movies where the people had more sense. So that was the opening, and I was pretty much done there. I gave it a few more minutes, but I was just so over it that I couldn't care about the characters and moved on. After I gave up on Twister, I decided to try for a romantic comedy. I found Four Weddings and a Funeral starring Hugh Grant and Andie MacDowell. Going in, I actually knew nothing about this movie except that it was a comedy from 1994. Less than 9 minutes in, I switched to something else. One of the biggest reasons for this was the amount and intensity of the cursing. I knew it was rated R, but I wasn't expecting 6 or more F bombs in 2 minutes or less. I was starting to think that two characters were competing for how many times they could use that word in a single scene. The only time I don't mind excessive language is in films where terrorists are taking over the Nakatomi building or similar plots. People trying to shoot you, valid situation for strong language. Ignoring your alarm clock, not so much. This brings me to the second annoying aspect of this film: Hugh Grant's character. I'm sure there are those of you that want me to give him another try, but he's an idiot. The first shot you see is him in bed with a nice suit hanging up nearby and his alarm clock going off. He wakes up just long enough to turn off his alarm and goes back to sleep. He was the best man at a wedding that morning and chose to sleep in. Then he realizes he's late, curses up a storm while he rushes to get to the church on time, then chides another person for showing up late. To the wedding he almost missed. They even had a backup groomsman at the altar with the groom when he arrived. That's how late he was. On top of that, he forgot the rings and had to borrow some from friends among the spectators and do it sneakily so the groom didn't know. That's actually as far as I got. I was too annoyed to keep going. So I moved on to my third classic, 1990's Ghost, starring Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and Whoopi Goldberg. I have seen this movie referenced so many times, I figured it would be a good one to see. It started kinda slow and steamy, which I was expecting from a 90s romance, but I was honestly wondering when the guy was going to die. Nothing against his character, but the movie is called Ghost, and most movies I know featuring ghosts either have the person already dead or they die in the first scene or two. So having a murder at the end of the first act, carrying over to the beginning of the second, was an interesting choice. However, my slight boredom was not what got me to turn it off. The film got weird. After the guy is shot, his ghost runs after the killer but is not able to catch up with him. Why he stopped, I don't know. To my knowledge, ghosts don't get tired or run out of breath. In any case, he comes back and is shocked to see his girlfriend holding his body. I could get really technical here and point out that the injury was not in a location that would have caused instant death, so it's a little odd that the ghost was already out of the body, especially since he sees another man who dies at the hospital and his spirit doesn't leave the body until the moment before the doctors give up on resuscitation. However, the really weird part was that he sees his body and suddenly he's waking up in bed with a wooden angel, and then he's in bed with his girlfriend and the wooden angel falls and breaks, and then he's back on the street looking up at the light. And I spent the rest of the short time I was watching the movie trying to figure out what that was all about. In the end, Perry Mason was far more appealing. So those were my 3 attempts at classic 90s movies. Maybe I'll revisit them at a later date, but for now, if I want a summer classic, I can't go wrong with Rocky, Doc Brown, or Chief Brody. Maybe I'll escape to a distant land with Han Solo or Indiana Jones. Young, not old. Point is, there's no shortage of good summer movies out there, if you're willing to turn back the clock a few years. Thanks for watching. Love them or hate them, what are your thoughts on these 90s classics? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the bell for notifications, and I will catch up with you next time.